She promised we were building a life together, but she was hiding a betrayal. Now I'm left wondering how I missed the signs. Me and Jess, we were together for 7 years, married for 2 of them. We waited to have kids because we wanted to make sure we were good financially first, just trying to be responsible. Anyway, things were going fine for a while, or so I thought. After we hit that 2-year mark, we decided it was time to try for a baby. That felt like the natural next step for us. Looking back now, I don't know how I missed it. The little signs were there, but when you're in it, you don't see them. I just thought we were having the usual ups and downs every couple has, nothing major. I mean, I loved Jess. I thought we were in this for the long haul, but man, was I wrong. So, a few months go by, we're trying for a kid, and I'm feeling pretty good about everything. I'm thinking about the future, picturing what life's going to be like as a dad. I had no clue what was coming. One night, I was at home just chilling, and I noticed Jess was acting kind of weird. She was on her phone a lot more than usual, but I didn't think much of it at first. I figured maybe she was just chatting with her friends or something, but then she started staying out late, saying she had work stuff or that she was meeting up with friends. So now, at this point, part of me was like, hey, maybe something's up, but the other part of me didn't want to believe it. I trusted her, You don't marry someone unless you trust them, right? So I brushed it off, but things kept getting stranger. She was distant, and I could feel this tension building between us, like we were in the same room but miles apart at the same time. I remember this one night. She came home super late. I'd already gone to bed, but I woke up when I heard her come in. She was trying to be quiet, but I could tell something was off. I asked her where she'd been, and she gave me some half-assed excuse about work drinks running late. She didn't even make eye contact when she said it, which was the first real red flag for me. But still, I let it slide because I didn't want to start a fight. I wasn't ready to face what I was starting to suspect. Things kept spiraling after that. Jess would go out more and more, and whenever I tried to ask her about it, she'd brush me off or get defensive. I didn't want to be that guy, the paranoid husband accusing his wife of cheating, so I kept it to myself. But deep down, I think I knew what was going on. I just didn't want to admit it. I didn't want to believe that the woman I loved, the woman I was trying to start a family with, would do something like that to me. Then, one night, everything came crashing down. I was at home, Jess had said she'd be working late again, and I was just sitting there, feeling like something was really wrong. You ever get that feeling in your gut like you just know something bad is about to happen? That's what I had. So, I did something I never thought I'd do. I checked her phone. Now, before anyone jumps down my throat, I know it was a shitty thing to do. But at this point, I was desperate. I needed to know what the hell was going on. So I unlocked her phone and started going through her messages. And there it was, right in front of me. All the proof I needed. She'd been texting some guy, Derek or something like that, for weeks. They'd been meeting up behind my back, and from the looks of it, things were way more than just friendly. My heart dropped. I couldn't believe it. I felt like the floor had been ripped out from under me. I didn't even know what to do. I sat there, staring at her phone, reading the messages over and over again, like maybe if I read them enough, they wouldn't be real. But they were. Jess had been cheating on me. I waited for her to get home that night. I didn't even know what I was going to say. I was just sitting there, stewing, thinking about all the lies she'd told me. When she finally walked in the door, she looked at me and knew something was up right away. I could see it in her eyes. I didn't waste any time. I just showed her the phone and asked her, "What the hell is this?" She froze. For a split second, I thought maybe she'd try to deny it, but she didn't. Instead, she started crying, like full-on sobbing, and I just stood there, waiting for some kind of explanation. But all she kept saying was, "I'm sorry. I didn't mean for it to happen. Didn't mean for it to happen." That's the thing that really got me. How do you not mean to cheat on your husband? How do you just accidentally betray someone like that? I wasn't having it. I told her right then and there that I wanted a divorce. She lost it. She started begging me to forgive her, saying we could go to couples therapy, that everyone makes mistakes. But I wasn't about to sit through therapy with someone who had been sneaking around behind my back for months. I couldn't believe she had the nerve to act like this was something we could just work through. Cheating is a deal breaker for me, always has been. Once the trust is broken, there's no going back. I think what pissed me off the most was how she tried to act like this wasn't her fault. Like she was some kind of victim of circumstance, or like I should just accept that everyone makes mistakes and move on. But I'm not that guy. I don't forgive cheating ever, so I stuck to my decision. I told her there was no going back from this, and I was done. The next few days were a blur. I filed for divorce, and thanks to our prenup, it all went pretty quickly. Jess kept trying to get me to change my mind, though. She'd call me, show up at the house, even try to talk to my friends to get me to give her another chance. It was pathetic, honestly, but I wasn't about to let her worm her way back into my life. In the end, I'm just glad I had the prenup in place. It saved me from a lot of the financial mess that usually comes with divorce. I kept everything, my house, my savings, because she was the one who screwed up. It didn't make the situation any less painful, but at least I didn't lose everything on top of it. And that's how it all started, the end of my marriage and the beginning of the mess that followed. I didn't realize then just how much damage it would do to me emotionally, but trust me, that part's coming. 3 years later, and I'm still dealing with the fallout, but we'll get to that. All right, so fast forward to after the divorce. Like I said, I cut all contact with Jess. I wasn't interested in any kind of closure conversation or whatever. I just wanted to move on. So I changed my number, moved to a new place, and basically went full ghost mode. If I could have erased her from my memory, I would have. I wasn't even trying to hate her at this point. I just wanted to forget she ever existed. Those first few months after the divorce were rough. I mean, I wasn't out here crying myself to sleep or anything, but there was this emptiness. It's hard to explain. It's like when you've been with someone for so long, they become part of your routine, part of your life. And then suddenly they're just gone. Not that I miss Jess specifically, but I miss the idea of what I thought we had. That was the hard part to let go of. The life I thought we were building together. I remember one night I was sitting at home drinking a soda and just thinking about how everything went to shit so fast. I mean, 1 minute we're planning for kids, the next minute I'm signing divorce papers. It's crazy how quickly your whole life can flip upside down, but I guess that's life for you, huh? During that time, I started going to therapy. I wasn't super keen on it at first. I had never been the therapy type. But after everything that happened, I figured I could use some help sorting through the mess in my head. And honestly, it ended up being one of the best decisions I made. My therapist helped me realize that a lot of the stuff I was feeling wasn't just about Jess cheating. It was about a bunch of other things I hadn't dealt with, like growing up. I never really learned how to express my emotions. My family wasn't big on talking about feelings. You just sucked it up and dealt with it, you know? So when Jess cheated on me, I didn't know how to handle the betrayal. It was like all these emotions I had bottled up my whole life exploded at once, and I didn't know what to do with them. Therapy helped me unpack all that. Anyway, enough about that. Here's where things get interesting. 3 years pass. I'm doing better. Still not 100% over everything, but better. I'm focusing on work, going out with friends more, even started dating again, though nothing serious. I'd occasionally think about Jess, but not in a I miss her kind of way. More like a I hope she's miserable kind of way. Yeah, I know, that's petty, but whatever. It's how I felt. Then one day I'm at the grocery store just minding my own business when I see them. Jess's parents. Now I hadn't seen or heard from them since the divorce, so this was completely unexpected. My first instinct was to just walk the other way and avoid the whole situation, but of course they saw me before I could make my escape. Jess's mom, let's call her Susan, came up to me all teary-eyed and emotional. I could already tell this was going to be some kind of guilt trip. Her dad, Tom, was with her, looking all solemn. I could feel the tension in the air before they even opened their mouths, and I was right. Susan immediately starts telling me about Jess. Apparently, Jess had been in a car accident, a bad one. She was in the hospital, in serious condition. I remember standing there, just kind of blank, like I didn't know what to say. What was I supposed to feel? I wasn't exactly happy to hear she was hurt, but I also wasn't about to start feeling sorry for her. Susan kept going, saying how Jess had been through so much, how she was struggling, and then, get this, she asked me to in the hospital. It would mean so much to her, Susan said. Despite everything, you were such an important part of her life. I almost laughed. I couldn't believe she actually thought I'd go visit Jess after everything that happened. Like, was she serious? I looked at her, and all I could say was, Jess isn't my problem anymore. I thought that was a pretty reasonable response, given the circumstances. But of course, that didn't go over well. Susan's eyes got all wide, and she started talking about forgiveness, about how I should let go of the past and show some compassion. Compassion? Let Jess in? For the woman who cheated on me? Yeah, no thanks. Tom, who had been silent up until this point, finally chimed in. He was calmer than Susan, but still gave me this look, like he couldn't believe I wasn't rushing to Jess's side. He said something about how everyone makes mistakes, and that it would be good for both me and Jess to make peace. Now, this is where I might have gone a little overboard. I was already pissed off that they were trying to guilt trip me into caring about Jess, but when Tom started in with that everyone makes mistakes bullshit, I lost it. I told them that Jess could rot in that hospital bed for all I cared. I know, harsh, but it's how I felt in the moment. I reminded them that she was the one who cheated, not me. I didn't owe her anything, especially not forgiveness, and I certainly wasn't going to go pretend to care about her, just because she had an accident. Then I threw in the fact that they always defended her, even when they knew she was in the wrong. They always made excuses for her, like her cheating was somehow my fault. By this point, Susan was crying, and Tom just shook his head at me, like I was the bad guy in all of this. So they tried to say some more stuff, but I wasn't interested. I just walked away, leaving them standing there in the middle of the grocery store. Later that night, I got a call from my dad. Turns out Jess's parents had reached out to my family to complain about how cold I had been to them. My dad was on their side, saying I should have just visited Jess to be the bigger person. My sister agreed, but my mom, thank God, was the only one who actually backed me up. She said I didn't owe Jess anything, and she was right. Still, it turned into this big family argument. Some of my friends even got involved, giving me their 2 cents. Some thought I was being too harsh, others thought I was completely justified. And honestly, I didn't care what anyone thought. I wasn't going to feel bad for not rushing to Jess's side like some knight in shining armor. She made her bed, and now she had to lie in it. So yeah, that's where I'm at. Jess is in the hospital, her parents are mad at me, and my own family is split down the middle over whether or not I should have visited her. But you know what? I'm not losing sleep over it. She's not my problem anymore. Update 1. So, after that whole mess with Jess's parents, I thought things would calm down. Like I wasn't expecting any more drama. But clearly, I was wrong, cause a few days later, I got a text from my sister Emma. It was one of those messages that you just know is going to lead to more crap. She said we needed to talk about what happened with Jess, and that she wanted to come over. Now, I wasn't really in the mood to deal with more lectures about how I should have handled things differently, but Emma's my sister, and we're pretty close, so I agreed. I figured she just wanted to give her opinion and get it off her chest. No big deal, right? Well, wrong again. Emma shows up at my place, and before I can even offer her a drink, she's already diving into the whole Jess situation. She starts off by saying she understands why I'm angry, but then she goes into this whole thing about how I should have visited Jess in the hospital just to get closure. Closure. I had my closure 3 years ago when we signed the damn divorce papers. I told Emma straight up that I wasn't going to pretend to care about someone who betrayed me like that. I mean, why would I? Jess was in my past, and that's where I wanted her to stay. But Emma kept pushing, saying stuff like, what if it was your last chance to say something to her? Or, what if something worse happened to her? I could feel myself getting more and more frustrated. It's like everyone just forgot what Jess did to me. She wasn't some innocent victim who needed my sympathy. She was the one who wrecked our marriage. So, I asked Emma flat out, if someone did to you what Jess did to me, would you be running to their bedside? Emma went quiet for a minute, and I thought maybe I got through to her. But then she hit me with, it's not the same though. You guys were married. You shared a life together, and honestly, that was it for me. I was done with the conversation. I told her I didn't want to hear about Jess anymore, and that I wasn't changing my mind. Jess could deal with her problems on her own. Emma wasn't happy with that, but she eventually dropped it and changed the subject. We talked about other stuff, work, family, whatever. But you could feel this weird tension in the air. It was like she was still thinking about the whole Jess thing, even though we weren't talking about it anymore. After she left, I felt this weird mix of anger and confusion. I mean, why was everyone so caught up on me visiting Jess? I didn't owe her anything. She cheated on me, and I moved on. Simple as that. But it seemed like everyone else just couldn't let it go. A couple days later, I found out why. I get a call from my dad, and he's pissed. Like, I could tell from his voice that this wasn't going to be a casual conversation. He says we need to talk, and he's on his way over. Now, this was weird for my dad. He's not the kind of guy who just shows up unannounced, so I knew something was up. When he gets to my place, he's fuming. He doesn't even sit down before he starts laying into me about how I disrespected Jess's parents and how I should have at least shown some decency by visiting her in the hospital. He goes on about how he raised me better than this and how disappointed he is in me for being cold-hearted. At this point, I'm just standing there, dumbfounded. Like, what the hell is going on? Why is everyone acting like I'm the bad guy here? So I try to explain my side, but my dad's not having it. He keeps saying that family is important and that I should have done the right thing. And that's when it clicked. It wasn't just about Jess. It was about my dad's past. Stuff I didn't even know about. See, during this whole rant, he let something slip that I never expected. Apparently, back when my parents first got married, my mom had cheated on him. I had no idea. This was news to me. And now, suddenly, everything made sense. Why my dad was so insistent on me forgiving Jess. Why he was so pissed that I wouldn't go visit her. He was projecting his own shit onto me. I remember standing there, just staring at my dad, trying to process what he just said. My mom had cheated on him. My dad, the guy who had always been the family man, had gone through something similar to what I did, and he stayed with her. That's when I lost it. I didn't yell or anything, but I was just so damn frustrated. I told him straight up, I'm not you. I'm not gonna forgive Jess just because you forgave Mom. And he didn't like that at all. He got real quiet for a minute, and then he just said, you don't understand. It's not that simple. But here's the thing. It was that simple for me. Jess cheated. I wasn't gonna forgive her. End of story. We went back and forth for a while, and it ended with my dad storming out of my place. We didn't exactly leave things on good terms, and honestly, I didn't know how to feel about it. On one hand, I understood why my dad felt the way he did. He'd been through his own shit, and I guess he thought that if he could forgive my mom, I should be able to forgive Jess. But on the other hand, I wasn't him. I wasn't going to let what she did slide just because he made peace with his own situation. The rest of that week was awkward. My dad didn't call, and I didn't reach out either. I figured we both needed some space. But the whole thing left me feeling weird. Like my whole perspective on my parents' marriage had just been flipped upside down. I kept wondering if I should talk to my mom about it, but at the same time, I didn't want to stir up more drama. A few days later, I got another text from Emma saying I should talk to Dad and make things right, but I wasn't ready for that. I needed to process everything first. I mean, it's not every day you find out your mom cheated on your dad and that your dad stayed with her for decades without you ever knowing. It messed with my head big time. So that's where things are at now. My family's a mess. Jess is still in the hospital, as far as I know, and I'm just trying to figure out how to deal with everything. All I know for sure is that I'm not going back to that life. Jess can stay in the past, and I'll keep moving forward, whether my family likes it or not. Update 2. Alright, let's get into what happened next. So after the whole argument with my dad, things were pretty tense. We didn't talk for a few weeks, which wasn't normal for us. Like I'd always been close with my dad, so this silent treatment thing was new territory. My sister Emma kept texting me, trying to play peacemaker, but I just wasn't ready. I needed space to figure things out, especially with all this crap I learned about my parents' past. Anyway, one night, I'm sitting at home, just watching TV, trying to unwind when my phone buzzes. It's from a number I don't recognize, but it's late, so I'm curious. I pick it up, and guess who it is? Jess. Yeah, out of nowhere. I don't even know how she got my new number, cause I'd changed it right after the divorce. But there she was, texting me like it was normal. The message wasn't long, just a simple, "Can we talk?" Like seriously? After 3 years of no contact, she just pops back into my life with a "Can we talk?" like we're old friends catching up. At first, I didn't even respond. I just sat there, staring at my phone, debating whether I should just block her and move on. But curiosity got the better of me, and I texted back, "What do you want?" It didn't take long for her to reply. She said she wanted to clear the air, that she'd been doing a lot of thinking since the accident, and that she needed to apologize properly. I wasn't buying it. I mean, she had 3 years to reach out and apologize, and now she decides it's time, right after her parents tried to guilt-trip me at the grocery store. Yeah, no thanks. So I told her straight up, there's nothing to talk about, we're done. I figured that would be the end of it, but Jess wasn't letting it go. She kept texting, saying she had things she needed to explain, that she was sorry for what happened, and just wanted me to hear her out. Honestly, part of me was tempted. I wanted to know what she thought she could say to make up for what she did, but at the same time, I knew nothing she said would change anything, so I didn't reply after that. I figured ignoring her was the best way to move on, but of course that's not where this ends. The next day I get another text, but this time, it's from Emma. She tells me that Jess had reached out to her too, and that she was trying to make amends with everyone. So apparently Jess had been going through some kind of life-changing moment after the accident, and now she wanted to fix all the things she screwed up. Emma, being Emma, thought I should give Jess a chance to explain herself. She kept saying, "What's the harm in hearing her out?" But I wasn't about to let Jess weasel her way back into my life just because she had a near-death experience. I told Emma to stay out of it, that it was between me and Jess, and that I wasn't interested in rehashing the past. Things were pretty quiet after that. A few days went by, and I didn't hear from Jess again, so I figured she finally got the message. But just when I thought it was over, I got a call. This time from my mom. Now, you gotta understand, my mom doesn't usually call me unless something serious is going on. We're not the type of family that checks in with daily phone calls or anything like that. So when I saw her name pop up on my screen, I knew something was up. I answered, and right off the bat she says, "We need to talk about Jess." I was already exhausted just hearing her say that. It felt like no matter how hard I tried to leave this chapter of my life behind, everyone was determined to drag me back into it. Turns out, Jess had reached out to my mom. Yeah, she went there. I guess she figured if she couldn't get through to me directly, she'd try going through my family. And in classic Jess fashion, she managed to manipulate my mom into thinking she was some sort of victim in all this. My mom started talking about how Jess had been through a lot since the accident, and how she'd changed, how she was genuinely sorry and just wanted to talk to me. I couldn't believe it. I told my mom flat out that I didn't care how much Jess had changed. It didn't change what she did to me. But my mom wouldn't drop it. She kept saying things like people can grow, and it wouldn't hurt you to hear her side. I was getting more and more frustrated. It's like no one in my family understood how much Jess's betrayal messed me up. They all acted like it was this small thing I should just get over. But it wasn't small to me. It was my whole damn life that got turned upside down because of her. After a while, I just told my mom I didn't want to talk about Jess anymore. I wasn't going to visit her. I wasn't going to talk to her. And I wasn't going to let her back into my life. I thought that was the end of it. But my mom hit me with something that stopped me in my tracks. Jess is dying. Yeah, that's what she said. Apparently, Jess's injuries from the accident were worse than I'd realized. She was still in the hospital. And according to my mom, the doctors didn't think she had much time left. My mom said that's why Jess was so desperate to talk to me, because she wanted to make things right before it was too late. Now, I don't know how to describe what I felt in that moment. It wasn't sadness. but it wasn't relief either. It was this weird mix of emotions that I wasn't ready to deal with. On one hand, part of me thought, well, that's karma, I guess. But on the other hand, it felt heavy. Like this person who'd once been such a huge part of my life was about to die. And here I was, refusing to even acknowledge her existence. I didn't know what to say to my mom. I just kind of sat there, letting it sink in. My mind was racing, trying to figure out how I felt about all of it. After a long pause, I finally said, I'll think about it. And that's where I left things. I didn't make any promises, but I didn't shut it down completely either. I guess I needed some time to process everything. So now, here I am, stuck in this weird place of not knowing what to do. Do I visit Jess and give her the closure she's apparently looking for? Or do I stick to my guns and keep her out of my life, even if she doesn't have much time left? I don't know, man. It's a lot to think about, and I'm still trying to wrap my head around it. Part of me feels like I'd be doing the right thing by giving her a chance to apologize. But another part of me just can't shake the anger and betrayal. I guess we'll see what happens next. Update 3. Alright, so here's what went down after that whole mess. I spent a few days just sitting with it, trying to figure out what to do. I kept thinking about what my mom said, about Jess dying and how this might be my last chance to talk to her. It was weighing on me, but not in the way you'd expect. It's not like I suddenly felt bad for her or anything, but it's hard to explain. I guess I was just stuck in my own head, going back and forth on whether I should give her that closure she was asking for. One night I couldn't sleep, so I went for a drive. It's something I do when I'm stressed, just driving aimlessly until my brain quiets down. I ended up parking in front of the hospital where Jess was staying. I didn't even plan on going there. It just kind of happened. I sat there in my car, staring at the entrance, debating whether to go in or just leave. Part of me wanted to get it over with, and another part was like, why the hell are you even here? I sat there for probably an hour, maybe more, just thinking about all the crap she put me through. Every lie, every time she went behind my back, all the begging during the divorce, trying to get me to forgive her. And now she wanted me to show up at her bedside, like none of that happened. It didn't feel right. Still, there I was, in the parking lot of the hospital at 2 a.m, thinking about walking in there and talking to her. Eventually I said, screw it. I got out of the car and went inside. I wasn't even sure if they'd let me in, considering the time, but the nurse at the front desk was cool about it. She pointed me in the direction of Jess's room, and before I knew it, I was standing outside her door. I didn't go in right away. I stood there, staring at the door, my hand on the handle, trying to convince myself to walk through it. Part of me still wanted to turn around and leave, but I'd come this far, and I figured I might as well see it through. When I finally opened the door, Jess was lying in bed, hooked up to all these machines. She looked different. Not just because of the accident or the fact that she was sick, but something else. She looked tired, worn out, like the years had taken more from her than I'd realized. It was strange seeing her like that after all this time. She didn't notice me at first. She was staring out the window, lost in her own thoughts. When she finally saw me, her eyes widened, like she couldn't believe I actually showed up. For a few seconds, we just stared at each other in silence. I didn't know what to say, and I think she was too shocked to speak. Eventually, she broke the silence. I didn't think you'd come, she said, her voice soft, like she was struggling to get the words out. I shrugged, trying to play it cool. Yeah, well, here I am. There was another long pause, and then Jess started to cry. Not the dramatic, attention-seeking kind of crying she used to do back when we were together, but something different. It was quieter, more real. It caught me off guard because, honestly, I didn't expect her to have any real emotions left for me. I'm sorry, she said, her voice shaking. I know I don't deserve to ask for your forgiveness, but I needed you to know that. I just stood there, not really knowing how to respond. I mean, what do you even say to that? I wasn't about to tell her everything was okay, because it wasn't. But at the same time, I wasn't there to tear her apart either. I don't know what you want me to say, I finally replied. You broke my trust. You broke us. That's not something you can just apologize for and expect it to go away. Jess nodded, still crying. I know, she whispered. I know I hurt you. I was selfish and stupid, and I don't expect you to forgive me. But I'm sorry for everything, for ruining what we had, for not being the person you deserved. Hearing her say that was weird. Part of me felt like I should be angry, but I wasn't. I wasn't angry anymore. Maybe I'd been angry for so long that I just ran out of it, you know? I was still hurt, still carrying that weight around, but the rage I used to feel wasn't there anymore. I looked at her, really looked at her, and realized how much time had passed, how much we'd both changed, and in that moment, I realized something. Closure wasn't about her. It was about me. I'd been holding on to this anger for years, thinking it was protecting me, but really it was just keeping me stuck in the past, and maybe seeing Jess like this, so vulnerable and broken, made me realize that. I don't hate you anymore, I said, surprising even myself with how calm I sounded. But I'm never going to forget what you did. Jess nodded again, tears still streaming down her face. I wouldn't expect you to. We sat there in silence for a while after that. I didn't really know what else to say, and I think Jess was too drained to keep talking. There was this strange sense of finality in the air, like we both knew this was the last time we'd ever see each other. After a while, I stood up to leave. Jess looked up at me, her eyes still red and puffy from crying, and said, "Thank you for coming. It means more to me than you know." I didn't say anything back. I just nodded and walked out of the room. As I made my way back to my car, I felt this weird sense of relief. It wasn't like I forgave her, but I didn't feel as weighed down anymore. Like maybe that chapter of my life was finally over, for real this time. I got in my car, sat there for a minute, and took a deep breath. For the first time in a long time, it felt like I could finally move on.
He accused me of hitting him, and my wife believed it. Now I'm fighting to rebuild a life that was torn apart by A. Lee. I'm 40 years old, been married to my wife Rebecca, also 40, for 5 years. She's got 2 kids from her previous marriage, Zach who's 10, and Chloe who's 8. I have a daughter from my previous marriage too, Lucy, she's 7. Everything's been mostly good, like we had the usual ups and downs, but we made it work. Blending our families together and all, at least I thought we were making it work. Until one day Zach just wrecked everything. It was a regular Tuesday night, nothing special. I got home from work, and the kids were already eating dinner. I sat down, Rebecca gave me a smile, and we just started chatting about whatever, the usual stuff. Then, out of nowhere, Zach looks at me across the table and says, "You hit me." Just like that, no build-up or anything. At first, I thought it was some weird joke. Like kids say dumb stuff all the time, right? So I just brushed it off and was like, "What are you talking about?" But Zach wasn't joking. He stood by it, saying that I hit him a few days ago when Rebecca wasn't home. I was stunned. I've never laid a hand on that kid, or anyone for that matter. I don't believe in that kind of discipline, and besides, I've never even felt the urge to. So I said, "No, I didn't," and just looked at Rebecca, waiting for her to back me up. But instead of saying anything, she just stared at Zach and then turned to me like she was processing it. She didn't believe me. I could tell just from her face. I felt this panic set in. It's hard to explain, but it's like the room got smaller all of a sudden. I was stuck between wanting to defend myself and not knowing how to, because how do you argue with a lie like that? How do you prove you didn't do something when there's no proof either way? It was just his word against mine, and Rebecca's trust in me was cracking right in front of my eyes. "Are you serious?" I asked her, getting up from the table. "You really think I'd hit your kid?" She didn't answer directly, just said, "We need to talk about this." I tried to keep calm, but inside I was losing it. So we went into the other room, and Zach stayed behind at the table with Chloe and Lucy, like nothing had happened. Rebecca shut the door, and that's when she started asking me straight up, "Did you hit him?" I said no again, obviously, but she just kept pushing, asking me why Zach would lie about something like that. I had no idea. I still don't. Maybe it was attention, or maybe he was mad about something. All I knew was that I didn't do what he was accusing me of, and yet Rebecca didn't believe me. The more we went back and forth, the more defensive I got, and it just made things worse. She was in full-on mama bear mode, like I was the enemy now. Finally, I just snapped. "I'm not staying here if you think I'm some kind of abuser, Rebecca. I'm not risking my life or my daughter's life over this." I stormed out of the house, not even knowing where I was going. I just needed air. I called my best friend Dan. I was pacing up and down the street, trying to make sense of everything. Dan's the kind of guy who doesn't sugarcoat stuff, and he wasn't having any of it. "Dude," he said, "you need to get the hell out of there now." I wasn't sure what to do, honestly. Like, this was my home, my family, and I didn't want to walk away. But Dan wasn't wrong either. He said, "Look, no one's gonna believe you over a kid. It's not fair, but it's the way it is, and if things go south, you could lose Lucy." That hit me hard. It hadn't even crossed my mind yet that things could get that bad, but once Dan said it, I couldn't stop thinking about it. What if it escalated? What if Zach doubled down and said something worse, or Rebecca went to the police? It would be his word against mine, and I had no idea how that would play out. I walked around the block for what felt like hours, my mind racing. I knew deep down what I had to do, even though it felt like ripping my life apart. Eventually, I went back to the house. Rebecca was still sitting in the living room, and Zach had gone to bed. I told her we needed to talk. Like, really talk. I sat her down, took a deep breath, and said, "Look, I didn't hit him. I don't know why he's saying that, and at this point I don't even care why anymore. What I do care about is that I don't feel safe in this house." She looked at me like I'd just slapped her across the face. "Safe? What do you mean you don't feel safe?" "I mean, if you don't believe me, I can't stay here. If you're already on his side, how long until something worse happens? What if Zach says something else, something that could ruin my life or take Lucy away from me?" I could feel my voice shaking. "I can't risk it." Rebecca just sat there, silent. I think she knew I was right, but she didn't want to admit it. I tried to stay calm, but inside I was a mess. So I told her I understood why she was protecting her son, and I didn't blame her for that. So I wasn't going to stick around and wait for the next accusation to happen. The last thing I wanted was to be near someone who could turn on me at any moment. I packed a bag for me and Lucy. Rebecca didn't stop me, didn't even say anything. I think she was still in shock, honestly. As I walked out the door, I told her, we can talk later, but for now I need space. So I need you to only contact me through text, no calls. She just nodded. I left without looking back. That night, Lucy and I stayed at my parents' place. I didn't tell Lucy the full story, just said we were visiting Grandma and Grandpa for a little while. I didn't sleep that night. Couldn't. My mind kept replaying the conversation over and over, wondering how we got here. How did a kid's lie destroy everything? It was like I could already see the road ahead, and it didn't look good. Things were never going to be the same. After leaving, things got really quiet, so Rebecca and I barely spoke for the first few days. It's like we were both walking on eggshells. I'd hear my phone buzz with a message from her, and my stomach would drop every time, wondering what kind of crap she was going to throw at me now. But to be honest, the texts weren't anything like I expected. At first, Rebecca was all over the place. I don't blame her. I mean, 1 second she was pissed. Then she was apologizing, and then she'd send me a wall of text asking to meet and talk things out. It was exhausting. I'd read her messages, but most of the time I didn't respond right away. I didn't know what to say. What was the point of talking in circles if she wasn't going to believe me? The weirdest thing, though, was how quickly she went from blaming me to blaming herself. It was like a switch flipped. 1 minute she was saying, I'm just trying to protect my son, and the next it was, maybe I overreacted. Maybe I didn't think it through. But by then, the damage was already done. Honestly, I don't think she even knew what she wanted. Part of her was probably thinking she could smooth it over, act like things could go back to normal if we just talked. But there was no going back. Not after she looked me in the eyes and doubted me like that. The problem is, once you cross that line, you can't just uncross it. Those first few weeks after I left were brutal. I was stuck between trying to protect myself and wondering if I was doing the right thing by walking away. I missed Rebecca, sure. But every time I thought about her, I saw that moment in my head when she sided with Zach without even hearing me out. It was like this tape playing over and over in my brain, and I couldn't turn it off. Lucy adjusted way better than I thought she would. She didn't ask a lot of questions, which I was thankful for. I just told her we were staying with Grandma and Grandpa for a while, and she accepted it. Kids are way more resilient than we give them credit for. I tried to keep things as normal as possible for her. We'd go to the park, play games, keep up with her schoolwork. I wanted her life to feel steady, even though mine was unraveling. Meanwhile, Rebecca's texts kept coming in, and they started getting desperate. She was saying things like, I miss you, and we can fix this. But how do you fix something like that? How do you just move past the fact that she was willing to believe her son's lie without even blinking? I told her the same thing every time. I'm not coming back until I know it's safe for me and Lucy. That was the bottom line. No matter how much I missed her, I couldn't risk everything on her just deciding to trust me again. That kind of trust doesn't just snap back like a rubber band. The moment everything shifted. Then one day, about 3 weeks after I left, I get a message from Rebecca that made me freeze. It was different from all the others. She said, I believe you now. Just like that. It was so out of the blue I had to read it a few times to make sure I wasn't imagining it. Apparently, after I left, she started thinking more about what Zach said and how he said it. She noticed some things that didn't add up. His story kept changing. And the more she pressed him, the more inconsistencies popped up. Eventually, she realized that Zach had been lying the whole time. I should have felt relief, right? I mean, that was what I'd been waiting for. But honestly, I didn't feel relief at all. I felt angry, furious even. Like, great, now you believe me. But where was that doubt when it actually mattered? Where was that critical thinking when you were accusing me of something so serious? You believed him over me without even questioning it. And now I'm supposed to just be okay because you've suddenly figured out the truth. Rebecca apologized in her texts over and over. She begged me to come home. She said she was sorry for not believing me, that she knew she'd messed up, and she wanted to fix things. But I wasn't so sure I wanted to be fixed anymore. I knew I had to respond, but I didn't know what to say. There was no way I could just go back, pretend like nothing happened. My trust in her was shattered, and it wasn't just about the lie. It was about the fact that she could believe something so damaging about me that easily. How do you come back from that? So I texted her back and I said, I'm glad you believe me now, but I can't risk it happening again. I can't trust Zach. And to be honest, I don't trust you either. I don't want to live in a house where I'm constantly worried about being accused of something like that again. Her response was heartbreaking. She asked me what I wanted her to do. She said she'd do anything to make it right, and I knew she meant it. But the truth was, I didn't know if anything could make it right. She asked me if I wanted her to give up custody of Zach and Chloe, so that was something I hadn't even considered. I never thought it would come to that, but now that she mentioned it, I couldn't shake the idea. If Zach wasn't in the house, I wouldn't have to worry about another false accusation. But what kind of person would I be if I asked her to give up her kids for me? I told her I loved her, and I did, still do in a way. But I also told her that I couldn't live in that house with her kids. I didn't trust it. I didn't trust them. I said I wasn't expecting her to give up her kids for me, but I couldn't see another way for us to move forward. It was this impossible choice. And I knew no matter what, someone was going to lose. When I hit send, I didn't know how she'd react. Would she be angry? Hurt? Beg me to reconsider. But what she said next was something I never saw coming. She was actually considering it. Rebecca said she'd thought about giving up custody of Zach and Chloe so we could stay together. I was stunned. This wasn't some off-the-cuff comment. She was seriously thinking about it. She wanted to make it work that badly. It didn't feel right, though. I mean, how could I let her do that? Her kids needed her, even if Zach had lied. And what kind of relationship would we have if it was built on something like that? It was a no-win situation. Update 1. So, here's the thing. When Rebecca told me she was actually considering giving up custody of Zach and Chloe, I didn't know how to feel. Like, this was a whole new level of messed up. On one hand, a part of me felt relieved that maybe there was a solution to all this mess, but the other part? I felt like absolute shit for even entertaining the idea. I never wanted Rebecca to give up her kids for me. I mean, what kind of person would I be if I asked her to do that? But the fact that she was thinking about it, that threw me. It was like she was willing to make the ultimate sacrifice just to keep me around. I couldn't wrap my head around it. A few days went by and I was still processing everything. So we were texting back and forth, but I was keeping my distance. Meanwhile, Rebecca's ex-husband, Kyle, caught wind of what was going on, and let's just say he was not happy. Out of nowhere, I get a call from Kyle. I didn't even recognize the number at first, so I let it go to voicemail. Big mistake. The message he left, pure anger. I'll never forget his voice. He was furious. Asking why the hell his ex-wife was talking about giving up custody of the kids, and what kind of shit was going on in our house. At this point, I knew I had to talk to him. I couldn't avoid it. So I called him back, and the second he picked up, it was like I was being hit by a freight train of questions. He was pissed. Honestly, I didn't blame him. Kyle, what the hell is going on, man? Why is Rebecca saying she might give up the kids? Zach and Chloe are my children too. You don't just make decisions like that without talking to me. Me. Look, Kyle, it's complicated. Zach accused me of something that didn't happen, and it's thrown everything into chaos. I never wanted Rebecca to give up custody, but after what Zach did, I can't go back to that house. Kyle was silent for a second, and I could tell he was piecing everything together. Kyle? So Zach lied? That's what this is about. Me. Yeah, that's the gist of it. Rebecca believed him at first, but now she knows it was all made up. But it's too late, man. The trust is gone. I can't live there with them. Not after what happened. Kyle let out a long sigh, and for a second, I thought he was about to blow up again, but instead he just sounded tired. Kyle. I can't believe this is happening. Zach, he's a good kid. But I don't know what's gotten into him lately. He's been acting out, but this is beyond anything I imagined. I didn't know what to say. I wasn't in the business of psychoanalyzing a 10-year-old. All I knew was that Zach's lie had wrecked everything. Kyle, look, I'm angry, but I get where you're coming from. I don't want my kids in the middle of this mess, either. But Rebecca giving up custody. That's not happening. I didn't argue with him. Honestly, I was glad he felt that way. The last thing I wanted was for Rebecca to go through with something she'd regret for the rest of her life. We agreed to leave it at that for now, and I hung up feeling like I'd just dodged a bullet, but also knowing that nothing had really been solved. A few days later, Rebecca texted me again. This time it was different. There was no apology, no back and forth about custody. She wanted to meet in person. She said she needed to talk face to face. No more texting. I wasn't sure I was ready for that. I mean, yeah, we'd been married for 5 years, but seeing her in person after everything felt like too much. Still, I agreed, mostly because I didn't see how we could keep texting forever. We had to face each other at some point. We met at a park halfway between my parents' place and the house. When I got there, she was sitting on a bench, looking like she hadn't slept in days. Her eyes were red, and she had this desperate look on her face. I sat down next to her, leaving enough space between us that it didn't feel too close. Rebecca, I'm losing everything. I can't do this anymore. I didn't know how to respond. What do you say to that? I felt like I'd already lost everything, too. Me. I'm sorry, Rebecca. I didn't want it to be like this. She just shook her head and looked away, tears starting to well up in her eyes. Rebecca, I can't believe my own son lied like that. I can't even look at him right now. He's staying with Kyle full time, and I don't even know when I'll see him again. There it was. The raw truth. Rebecca was falling apart, and Zach had wrecked not only my life but hers too. I didn't want to see her like that. But at the same time, I couldn't forget what she'd done. She had doubted me when I needed her trust the most. Me. Look, I don't know what to say. I'm not sure there's anything to fix here. I can't come back. Not with Zach in the picture. Rebecca, but I need you. And now she paused, taking a deep breath. I'm pregnant. My heart stopped. I wasn't expecting that. Not even close. I just stared at her, trying to process what she'd said. Pregnant? Now? In the middle of all this? Me, how far along are you? Rebecca, 12 weeks. I just found out a few days ago. I didn't even know what to say. It felt like everything had just gotten 100 times more complicated. Rebecca, I'm scared, okay? I don't want to go through this alone. I'm sorry for everything, for not believing you, for all of it. But please don't leave me now. I could see the panic in her eyes, and for a second, I felt guilty. Like maybe I was abandoning her. But then I remembered everything we'd been through. Everything Zach's lie had done. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about protecting Lucy and myself, too. Me. I'm sorry, but I can't do this. I can't come back and pretend everything's fine just because you're pregnant. We're still getting a divorce. Rebecca's face crumpled, and for the first time in a long time, I saw her break down completely. She cried, and I just sat there, watching her. There was nothing else I could do. I felt like the worst person in the world, but I knew I had to stand my ground. After that, we sat in silence for a while. I didn't know what else to say, and she didn't either. Eventually, I stood up and told her I had to go. She didn't try to stop me. I think she knew that things were beyond fixing. As I walked back to my car, I felt like something inside me had finally snapped. This was it. There was no going back. No second chances. I'd done everything I could, but in the end, it wasn't enough. I drove home feeling numb, like my entire world had collapsed, and maybe it had. Update 2. The days after that conversation at the park felt unreal, I guess. I mean, here I am, dealing with a divorce, a false accusation from a kid I thought I was starting to connect with, and now, a baby on the way. It was like life kept throwing stuff at me, and I was just standing there, taking it. I kept telling myself to stay strong for Lucy, but it was hard. Rebecca and I didn't talk much after the park. We went back to texting, but it was different now. The tone was off. She wasn't begging me to come back anymore. Instead, she was resigned. Like she'd finally accepted that this was happening. That our marriage was really over. The divorce papers were already in motion. We'd both agreed to keep things as civil as possible for the kid's sake. But no matter how calm we tried to stay, there was still this huge elephant in the room, the baby. I didn't know how to feel about it. One part of me wanted to be excited, a baby is a big deal. And under normal circumstances, I probably would have been over the moon. But these weren't normal circumstances. Not even close. I was angry, confused, and honestly scared out of my mind about how this was going to play out. Co-parenting with Rebecca was already going to be complicated with Lucy. And now we were adding a newborn to the mix. I tried not to think too much about the future, though. I was focused on getting through each day, one at a time. I had to make sure Lucy was okay, that she wasn't affected by all the chaos going on around her. A week or two after our talk, Rebecca sent me a long message about Zach. She told me that their relationship had completely fallen apart since the whole incident. Zach had moved in with Kyle full-time, and Rebecca barely heard from him anymore. She tried calling, texting, even showing up at Kyle's place. But Zach wanted nothing to do with her. Honestly, I wasn't surprised. Kids can be ruthless sometimes, and Zach was probably feeling the weight of his lie. He knew what he'd done. And now that everything was out in the open, it was like he couldn't face the consequences. So instead of trying to fix things with his mom, he just disappeared. I felt bad for Rebecca, though. No matter what happened between us, I didn't want her to go through that. No parent deserves to be cut off from their kid like that, especially not when they're still so young. She told me she was heartbroken, that she didn't know how to fix it. I didn't have any advice to give her. What could I say? She'd believed Zach when he told the lie, and now that the truth had come out, their relationship was shattered. It wasn't like I could swoop in and make everything better. If anything, I was part of the reason things were broken in the first place. Even though I didn't ask for any of this, there were moments when I'd sit and think about everything that had gone down. And I'd get hit with this overwhelming guilt. I knew it wasn't really my fault, but it felt like it. Rebecca was losing her relationship with Zach, And she was going to have to go through this pregnancy alone. She had to deal with the divorce, raising Chloe, and managing a broken relationship with her son, all at the same time. I kept replaying that moment in the park. When she told me she was pregnant, how scared she looked. And now here I was, living at my parents' place with Lucy, and Rebecca was left to pick up the pieces. It was hard not to feel responsible for some of it, even though I knew it was Zach's lie that started all of this. But that's the thing about guilt, it doesn't care about logic. I didn't reach out to Rebecca to talk about it though. I kept my distance. I figured the less we talked, the easier it would be to get through the divorce and move on. But that didn't stop the guilt from creeping in, especially at night when I was alone with my thoughts. After a few more weeks, things started to settle down a bit. The legal stuff was moving along, and Rebecca and I had come to an agreement about Lucy. We'd share custody, and I'd make sure to stay involved as much as possible. It wasn't the perfect setup, but it was better than nothing. Rebecca was still struggling with Zach though. She'd tried to reach out again. But Kyle wasn't having it. He was still pissed about the whole custody conversation, and I couldn't blame him. If the roles were reversed, I would have been just as angry. So Rebecca told me she hadn't seen Zach in over a month. He was ghosting her, and she didn't know how to handle it. She even tried talking to Chloe about it, but that just made things worse. Chloe is confused and upset about everything, and she didn't want to be stuck in the middle. The whole family dynamic had completely fallen apart. I didn't know how to help. I wasn't in a position to offer advice or be there for Rebecca in the way I used to. I had to focus on Lucy, on building a stable life for the two of us. But still, hearing Rebecca's messages, it was like a punch to the gut. I could hear the pain in her words, and I hated that I couldn't do anything about it. Rebecca's pregnancy continued to be the big, looming thing in the background. Every few days, she'd update me on how she was feeling, how the baby was doing. It was weird knowing that I was going to be a dad again, but not being part of the process like I was with Lucy. I wasn't going to be there for the doctor's appointments, the ultrasounds, or even the birth. It felt disconnected, like I was watching it all from the outside. We talked a little about how we'd handle things once the baby was born. Co-parenting was going to be tricky, especially since we'd be living apart. But we agreed that we'd figure it out as we went. We didn't have much of a choice. Rebecca said she'd do everything she could to make sure Zach didn't cause any more problems. But even with that promise, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was too little, too late. The damage had already been done. I guess looking back, this whole thing feels like a slow-motion train wreck. I didn't want any of this to happen, but once it started, there was no stopping it. One lie from Zach, and my entire life flipped upside down. Now here I am, trying to pick up the pieces and figure out what comes next. Rebecca's about to give birth to a baby we'll have to co-parent while we go through a divorce. Zach is barely in the picture, and Lucy is the only thing keeping me grounded. All I can do is keep moving forward and hope that, someday, things get better. Update 3: the day I officially got the divorce papers in my hand was the weirdest feeling. I'd been expecting it, waiting for it. But when it actually arrived, I just stared at the envelope for a while. I wasn't even sure why it hit me so hard. It wasn't like it was a surprise. Rebecca and I had both agreed this was where we were headed. Still, it felt like the final nail in the coffin of a life I thought I'd be living for a lot longer. I didn't open the envelope right away. I just left it on the kitchen counter and went about my day trying to distract myself with Lucy. She's so intuitive. That kid. She could sense something was up even though I was putting on my best everything's fine act. She kept asking me if we were still going to the park later, like she was testing to see if the plan was still on. I promised her we'd go, no matter what. It's moments like that when you realize how much kids pick up on, even when you think you're hiding things well. She didn't know about the divorce yet, not the full picture anyway. I told her that her mom and I weren't going to live together anymore, but explaining the why of it all. I wasn't sure how to do that without dumping adult problems on her. She didn't need to know the specifics, she just needed to know I was there for her, no matter what. Rebecca's struggles. Meanwhile, Rebecca was in her own world of chaos. She was dealing with the final stages of pregnancy, the divorce, and trying to fix her relationship with Zach. So I'd hear bits and pieces from her through texts, mostly about how difficult it had become to even get Zach to respond to her. He was still living full-time with Kyle, and from what she told me, he was barely talking to her. I didn't say much when she'd vent about it. I mean, what could I say? It wasn't like I could swoop in and fix that relationship for her. Zach had made his choices, and Rebecca was dealing with the fallout. I felt for her, honestly. I might have been pissed at her for how everything went down between us, but no parent deserves to lose their relationship with their kid. And from what I could see, Zach wasn't budging. There were even a couple of times when Rebecca hinted that maybe I could talk to Zach, try to help patch things up, but that was a non-starter for me. I told her straight up, that's between you and him. I can't get involved. I didn't want to make things worse by sticking my nose into that mess. Zach had already made his feelings clear about me, and I wasn't about to jump into that fire again. When Rebecca's due date finally came around, I wasn't there. That was the hardest part. With Lucy, I was at the hospital, right by Rebecca's side, holding her hand the whole way through. This time I was sitting at my parents' place, waiting for a text to let me know it was over. I'll never forget that feeling, knowing that my child was being born, but I wasn't there. I kept pacing around the house, checking my phone every 5 minutes, waiting for an update. Finally, around 3 a.m., I got the message. He's here. It was a boy. My son. I didn't know what to feel. There was this rush of happiness. Because let's be real, a new life coming into the world is always something to celebrate. But there was also this pit in my stomach, like I was already missing out on so much. I wasn't there to hear his first cry. I wasn't there to hold him for the first time. Rebecca sent me a photo of him a little later. He was tiny, wrapped up in one of those hospital blankets, with a little hat on his head. He was perfect, and I wasn't there. The first few weeks after the baby was born were complicated. Rebecca and I were trying to figure out how to co-parent, but it was messy. She needed help, but I wasn't living there anymore. And I had Lucy to think about too. There was this constant back and forth about when I could come over to see the baby, how often I'd be involved, what was fair, and all that. I went over a few times to help, but it was awkward. There was this wall between us now. We weren't just parents anymore. We were divorced parents. Every interaction was tinged with this unspoken tension, like we were both just trying to get through it without bringing up all the crap that led us here. But holding my son for the first time, that was something else. He was so small, and I just kept thinking about how much I'd missed already, even though he'd only been around for a couple of weeks. I wanted to be there for him, to be the dad he needed. But how was I going to do that from a distance? Co-parenting with Lucy was already hard enough. Adding a newborn to the mix made it feel impossible. Rebecca was still dealing with Zach's absence, and it was weighing on her. She tried to hide it, but I could see how exhausted she was. She'd talk about how she didn't know how to juggle everything, being a mom to Chloe, raising a newborn, and trying to fix things with Zach. I didn't have the answers, and I wasn't in a position to offer much support beyond being there for the baby. After a couple of months, things started to settle into a weird kind of normal. Rebecca and I worked out a routine for sharing time with the baby, and Lucy was adjusting to the new situation. I'd have Lucy with me most of the time, and then I'd go over to Rebecca's to see the baby a couple of days a week. It wasn't ideal, but we made it work. There were still plenty of moments where I felt disconnected, like I was only getting bits and pieces of my son's life, but that was the reality now. I had to accept that I couldn't be there every second, that I had to let go of the idea of a normal family, because nothing about this was normal. Lucy, though, she was a rock star through it all. She took to being a big sister like it was second nature, and seeing her with the baby brought a little bit of light into the mess. She didn't care about the divorce, or the custody stuff, or any of the adult drama. All she cared about was her baby brother, and that was enough for her. Now, looking back at everything that's happened, I'm still trying to wrap my head around it. One false accusation and everything unraveled. My marriage, my family, my life, it's all been flipped upside down. But somehow I'm still standing. I've got Lucy, I've got my son, and I'm trying to build something out of the wreckage. It's not perfect, and it probably never will be, but it's the life I've got now, and I'm doing my best to make it work.